my dad made me put this San Diego Rooster outfit on and stand in front of the dealership and wave at cars, right? So I got into it. I'm waving at all these cars, and all of a sudden, and this guy's looking at me. And if you see some of those commercials, Mayhem commercials, right? This guy's looking at me, and I'm jumping up and down, waving, "Come on into the dealership," and all this kind of stuff. This guy rear ends a car right in front of the dealership.
Welcome to the Hire Yourself Podcast, a podcast that focuses on business and franchising. We are here to help people realize their dreams and control their destiny through franchise ownership and business success. This twice-weekly podcast will focus on topics to help you achieve your business goals. Each Monday, we'll publish an episode that focuses on a specific idea of franchising or business. And every Thursday will be a less structured conversation on a topic Pete and I think will help you live life on your own terms.
So Nat, we got an interesting topic today. On our earlier podcast we did this week, we talked a little bit about business development and sales, and both of us kind of talked about the impact of our fathers in our lives. And I thought this would be a great time to jump into how our fathers made a difference in our lives. So Nat, I know you grew up with a dad that worked extremely hard and actually involved you in his business. So tell me a little bit about the impact of working side by side with your dad. That had to have been pretty cool.
Yes, it was, I don't know if I call it pretty cool. It was definitely trial by fire. My dad owned a masonry company, so he worked as a bricklayer and then had bricklayers and laborers that worked for him. I remember when I was 10 years old, kind of started out by going out to the job sites and picking up broken bricks and tossing them into the dump truck all day. So that was pretty fun. And then as I got a little bit older, I would...
I want to make sure I understand this correctly. Picking up bricks and putting them in a dumpster, you considered fun. I just want to make sure that I got that right.
Yeah, it was pretty fun. Worked on my suntan as a 10-year-old and made some spending money. But yeah, so after, if you can kind of visualize, like say an office complex where there's the brick exterior, after the bricklayers were done and the scaffolding was removed, there's like bricks like scattered all over. So all that had to be picked up and cleaned up. So kind of learned that work ethic of leaving things better than you found them. Like, you had to clean up everything and get it out of there. And then I graduated eventually, and then I was able to start making mortar. So mortar is another one of those super fun things where a dump truck comes and literally dumps a mountain of sand. And then you have these bags of Portland powder, basically. And then you had a 50-gallon barrel of water. So what you do is you basically put in a little water, put in a couple bags of the powder, and then start shoveling sand. I have to just laugh as I kind of remember that because, it's literally a mountain of sand.
Well, especially when you're 10 years old.
Yeah. Well, no, I was a little bit older, probably like 13 years old when I
graduated.
All right.
Point taken.
Yeah.
All right, good.
Yeah, because, had to be bigger and stronger to do that job.
Sure.
Yeah, so the goal was to make mortar, and then you dumped it into this wheelbarrow, and then wheeled it over to the scaffolding and just started scooping it out. And
I can't imagine that wheelbarrow was light. I mean, you put all that stuff in there, pushing that at 13 or 14 or whatever you were. That had been a lot of weight, and I expect it wasn't always flat ground. You're probably pushing it uphill every once in a while.
Yeah, they were job sites, so there was always ruts and everything else. And you only dumped one wheelbarrow, and then you realized that was not acceptable because that'd be throwing away money, right? So then the bricklayers have this 2-foot by 2-foot mortar pad, and so we'd load that up with mortar and had to keep the bricks all loaded up for them and everything. So, that I learned at a pretty young age that that was hard work. And so I decided, I was going to try to be a little bit more entrepreneurial and, I was going to do well at school. And I was also going to, try to figure out how to do something else that wasn't quite as physically tiring.
Yeah. So I come from a different background. My dad I would call it white collar. So he ran car dealerships. And so my dad was always gone. He worked 15 hours a day, that kind of stuff. And so what that meant for me is that I wasn't working in my dad's business. Oh, I did a couple times, but but that's a whole other story. It wasn't really about working hard. It was about pure embarrassment. But my dad would basically at fourth grade, I would be the guy around the house. So if, for example, the garage needed to be cleaned, my dad would just say, clean the garage. And I had to do that. Or if there was mice in the house, my job was to trap those mice or chase them down or get it where it was. That's what I did. My dad kind of just basically demonstrated you work hard, but in a much different way. So the funny story about working for my dad in the car dealership is he woke me up on a Saturday and he said, "You're coming with me. I have a job for you at the dealership." And I'm all excited. I get to help out of the dealership, right? And so I show up and he's got one of those, remember the San Diego Rooster outfits? So I'm probably 14 years old. My dad made me put this San Diego Rooster outfit on and stand in front of the dealership and wave at cars, right? So I got into it. I'm waving at all these cars, and all of a sudden, and this guy's looking at me. And if you see some of those commercials, Mayhem commercials, right? This guy's looking at me, and I'm jumping up and down, waving, "Come on into the dealership," and all this kind of stuff. This guy rear ends a car right in front of the dealership.
Oh man!
So,
Unbelievable.
but my dad eventually owned his own dealership. And so he would do things like, I was 16 years old, and he'd say, okay, the entire shop where they fix all the cars, he'd say, here's some money. I want you to go get some paint, rent a power washer, and I want you to paint this entire shop. Now, I'd never painted before in my life. And at 16, I had to go figure out how to paint this entire shop at the dealership. But that was just kind of the way my dad was, is that you worked hard. So
Yeah, I think the lessons that we probably both learned at an early age was responsibility, or kind of that buck stops here type, owning the outcomes, because it wasn't like failure was not an option.
right. Well, I remember the story you talking about a little bit, like if you guys built a wall wrong, a bricked a wall, you tear it down, right? I mean, that's 100% accountability.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about that story. I'm sure that was a pretty good one, ripping down a brick wall.
Well, I mean, it definitely happened, because when you think about masonry or bricklaying or stone or all that, any of that, when you're building a house or a building, that's pretty much, as a bricklayer or mason, you believe, your belief system is that is going to be there basically forever, right? That'd be your hope anyways. And so it has to be done right. And then also it is kind of your reputation or your pride of workmanship is on the line, your craftsmanship. So a lot of times, sometimes we'd be building brick piers, and as you might imagine, sometimes if the conditions weren't just right, then all of a sudden the piers would start to spread, and some bricklayers would kind of just try to cover it up or ignore it. And more than once, if my dad saw like, hey, this isn't square or this isn't right, then you'd have to tear it down and do it over again. So again, you kind of learn real fast, like it's better and easier just to do the job right the first time than have to tear it down and do it again. Basically, if you had to tear something down and do it again, you're doing it on your own time, not going to be during business hours.
Yeah, that'd be back in the category of fun. I
Yeah,
know,
exactly.
absolutely.
Yeah.
No, my dad was all about 100% accountability. At about 16, my parents got divorced, and I ended up living in a townhome by myself. My father wasn't there much. I saw him about every 3 weeks, but literally the deal where he gave me my lunch money for the entire year. So he would say, there's 182 days. Here's $182. You can spend it in one day, or you can spend it each day to have a lunch. He would do things like, here's your grocery money, and you're responsible for buying the groceries and that kind of stuff. And so it was absolutely positively where if I decided I wasn't going to go to school, that was on me. I had to deliver the grades. I had to go to school and stuff like that. So one time my dad decided to go out of town for 3 weeks on a dream vacation. Unfortunately, he didn't tell me where he was going. He just left. And so I happened to knock a tooth out. And so I had to go to the dentist. And so bottom line is I wrote a note for myself to get out of school. It said, Pete Gilfillan is going to the dentist, right? So I get called to the principal office, and the principal goes, hey, listen, you can't sign your own absentee note. And I said, well, I don't know what you want me to do. From that standpoint, I've got to go get this tooth fixed. So then I had to go convince the dentist that they couldn't get a hold of my dad to actually do the work before we paid for it. So my dad was all about accountability from that standpoint. It was just, you get it done, and
Yeah.
there's nothing falling back on anything. So
I feel like that's a common theme with a lot of the candidates that we work with too. I love hearing their stories and a little bit about their backgrounds and all that. And I feel like, a lot of people kind of like, they're looking for a business or an opportunity to share entrepreneurship with their own kids, or at least expose them to that. Even I think sometimes with college education and degrees and the jobs out there, I think they like the idea of maybe someday if my son or daughter wants to work in the business as they're kind of going through school, or maybe sometime build it and have it as a legacy for the family, like create this legacy or empire that the kids can have one day.
Yeah, I think one of the things when I work with somebody and they invest in a franchise, I have a now that you're a franchisee speech, and I talk a little bit about they have a great opportunity as they become entrepreneurs, as they invest in that business, that they can leverage that business to teach their kids about being entrepreneurs. And my belief is that our kids are growing up in a much different world, right? The idea of getting going to college, getting a degree, getting a job, it's changing. We're more in that gig economy, and so if we could teach our kids about this idea of being entrepreneurs or expose them to it. So like when I invested in my first business, my kids were young and I gave all my kids job titles in the business. So my youngest, who was 4, she was my chief fun officer. And she had a business card, and her job was to come up with fun activities for the family. And each of my kids had roles, but this idea that we wanted to expose them to this business or being entrepreneurs, we'd have a dinner every other Sunday. And we would talk about aspects of business like the benefits of paying cash versus with credit. And so I do believe that as parents or as adults, we can have this great opportunity to help kids or the younger generation leverage, in this case, franchising to take control or to set their own destiny from that standpoint. No question about it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was just talking with my 15-year-old. We were at Starbucks, and I was telling him that you and I were doing our podcast today, and I didn't realize, but he's actually been listening to our podcast and picking up on a lot of things. And then he was even like, I should do a podcast at high school. There's some other kids that are doing a podcast. Like, it's just interesting that how kids are kind of indirectly, watching us and influenced by us, and kind of that we're always leading by example, kind of that whole, our actions speak louder than our words sometimes. And so yeah. I like owning a business that's kind of a framework to just expose them to new ideas or things.
Well, and I think, as I grew up, my dad was very much about making me stronger and more resilient, understanding that life is tough and stuff like that. And so he wanted me to gain that strength and resilience. And we certainly did that. My dad didn't want me to ever take the easy path. And so, for example, when I wrestled, we lived about a mile and a half, and we were in Minnesota, and wrestling happens in the winter. And so my dad wanted to, after I went through wrestling practice, he wanted me to run home in my street clothes in February from wrestling practice to make me tough, to make me resilient. To the point where if somebody actually gave me a ride home, he would call them and tell them not to give me a ride because he wanted me to become stronger. And I draw upon that as I go through tough things in business, or I go through things personally that are difficult. I draw upon that strength that he taught me, maybe in a really harsh way, but the idea is that we are always leveraging what we learned or what we observed from our fathers in this particular case.
Yeah, I love that story. And I still remember, like, whenever I go up to Minnesota and I see, Minnesota people, they're like, it's 20 degrees or colder, and they're walking around in their shorts. So it's like, it's a little bit of a different culture up there, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. So Nat, I think as we bring this to a close, you and I, we're very fortunate that we have two very different experiences growing up, but both of us really had the opportunity to learn some great things from our fathers, whether it's this idea of working hard, 100% accountability, or this idea of resilience, being stronger. And we hope to take that forward with our kids, right, as we lead by example. And I think that's the benefit of owning a franchise business or being an entrepreneur, is that it's just one way in which you can help develop or grow your kids.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Hire Yourself Podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, give us a rating, and leave a comment on iTunes or whatever podcast listening app you use. Hire Yourself offers some great resources on our website, hireyourself.com. And if you would like our content more regularly, follow us on LinkedIn or Facebook. We look forward to you listening again to help you on your journey of living life on your own terms.